Thomas Harrington had always considered himself a fortunate man. At 58, he had built a comfortable life through decades of hard work at the engineering firm, where he'd risen to senior project manager. His colonial-style home in the suburbs was nearly paid off, his retirement account was healthy, and his 2 adult children were successfully launched into their own lives. But it was his marriage to Catherine, Kate to everyone who knew her, that had always been his greatest source of pride. 32 years together, and they still enjoyed each other's company. Or so he thought. That Wednesday evening in October began like any other. Thomas arrived home from work around 6:30, loosening his tie as he walked through the front door. The house was quiet. Kate had texted earlier that she was having dinner with her book club friends and would be home around 9. He microwaved some leftover lasagna and settled into his recliner with the newspaper. After dinner, he decided to tackle the leaky faucet in their master bathroom that Kate had been asking him to fix for weeks. Thomas gathered his tools and headed upstairs. In the bathroom, he opened the cabinet beneath the sink and removed his toolbox. As he shifted some cleaning supplies to make room, a small white box tumbled out from behind the stack of extra toilet paper. Curious, he picked it up. It was a prepaid cell phone, the cheap kind you could buy at any convenience store. Thomas frowned. Neither he nor Kate used prepaid phones. Their cell phones were part of a family plan they'd had for years. A strange feeling settled in his stomach as he turned the phone over in his hand. He pressed the power button, and the screen lit up. No password protection. Thomas sat down on the edge of the bathtub, his heart suddenly pounding. He told himself there must be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a backup phone Kate had bought for emergencies. Maybe it belonged to someone else entirely. Their daughter Emily might have left it during her last visit. The texts were all from someone saved simply as D. The most recent had come in just 2 hours ago. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. The usual room. I've missed you so much. Thomas scrolled up, each message more intimate than the last. References to meetings at hotels, inside jokes, expressions of desire, and photos. Photos that made Thomas's hands shake so badly he nearly dropped the phone. He continued scrolling back through weeks of messages, each one driving the knife deeper. There were arrangements for meetings during times when Kate had told him she was with friends or at her painting class. There were loving messages sent late at night, presumably while Thomas slept just inches away from her. The final blow came when he found a message from 3 months ago. Happy anniversary, beautiful. 6 amazing months together. Here's to many more. 6 months. While Thomas had been working late to secure the Peterson contract, while he'd been planning their anniversary trip to Napa Valley, while he'd been building what he thought was their dream life together, Kate had been living a double life. He sat there for what felt like hours, the bathroom faucet still dripping steadily behind him. His mind raced through their recent months together, reinterpreting every late night out, every distracted conversation, every time she'd pulled away from his touch. The sound of the garage door opening jolted him back to reality. Kate was home early. Thomas quickly turned off the phone and slipped it into his pocket. He stood up, catching his reflection in the mirror, a man he barely recognized, ashen-faced and hollow-eyed. He heard Kate's footsteps on the stairs, her humming a tune he didn't recognize. Thomas took a deep breath and stepped out of the bathroom. "Yes," he said, surprised by how normal his voice sounded when everything inside him was screaming. "I was just fixing the faucet." Kate appeared in the hallway, smiling. She was wearing a blue dress he'd always loved, her silver-streaked dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She looked beautiful. She looked like a stranger. Diane wasn't feeling well, so we cut it short. She came closer, kissing him on the cheek. "Did you fix it?" The casual domesticity of the moment, while the weight of what he'd discovered pressed down on him, was almost unbearable. "No rush," she said, moving past him toward their bedroom. "I'm going to take a shower." Thomas nodded, unable to trust himself to speak further. As the bathroom door closed behind her and the shower started running, he stood frozen in the hallway, the hidden phone feeling like it was burning a hole in his pocket. In that moment, Thomas Harrington's world, the one he had spent decades carefully building, began to crumble around him. Thomas barely slept that night. He lay rigid beside Kate, listening to her peaceful breathing, wondering how she could sleep so soundly while living such a profound lie. Each time she shifted in her sleep, he flinched, as if her touch might burn him. By morning, he had convinced himself that confronting her immediately would be a mistake. He needed more information. He needed to be certain. Over breakfast, he watched Kate prepare for her day. She was a kindergarten teacher at the local elementary school, beloved by her students and respected by parents. Now, Thomas wondered if her entire persona was an elaborate facade. "I might be late tonight," she said, pouring coffee into her travel mug. "Parent-teacher conferences." The lie, if it was a lie, rolled off her tongue so effortlessly that Thomas felt a fresh wave of nausea. "What time do you think you'll be home?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Probably around 8, she replied, gathering her things. "Don't wait dinner for me." After she left, Thomas called his office and, for the first time in years, took a personal day. Then he retrieved the hidden phone from where he'd stashed it in his desk drawer and began his investigation in earnest. The mysterious D had to be someone Kate knew well. Thomas scrolled through her contacts on their shared family computer, looking for names starting with D. David from her art class, Dennis from the school, Daniel, their neighbor's son who sometimes did yard work for them. Then he remembered Kate's new colleague at school, Derek Sullivan, the music teacher who had started last year. Thomas had met him at the school's holiday party. Handsome, divorced, probably in his early 40s, Thomas had thought nothing of it at the time when Kate mentioned working with him on the spring concert. With shaking hands, Thomas searched for Derek Sullivan online. Within minutes, he found the man's social media profile. The profile picture showed a tanned, athletic man with salt and pepper hair standing beside a sailboat. Thomas felt sick as he scrolled through Derek's photos. There were several of school events where Kate would have been present, though she wasn't in any of the pictures. But it was a post from July that stopped Thomas cold, a sunset photo taken at Lakeview Park, captioned simply, "Perfect evening with perfect company." Thomas remembered that evening clearly. Kate had told him she was attending a workshop on new teaching methods. She'd come home late, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, claiming the workshop had been inspiring. The next revelation came from the prepaid phone itself. Thomas found a photo buried in its gallery, a selfie of Kate and a man whose face was partially out of frame, but Thomas recognized enough to confirm it was Derek Sullivan. They were sitting close together, Kate's head resting on his shoulder, both smiling broadly. The timestamp showed it was taken during the weekend Thomas had visited his brother in Chicago 3 months ago. By midday, Thomas had compiled enough evidence to remove any doubt. His wife of 32 years was having an affair with a man more than a decade her junior. Thomas sat in his home office, surrounded by framed family photos that now seemed to mock him. He and Kate on their wedding day, family vacations, their children's graduations, decades of what he had believed was shared happiness. June. He thought about confronting Kate immediately when she returned home that evening. He imagined the scene, his accusations, her denials, then perhaps confession, tears, apologies. But what then? Could their marriage survive such a betrayal? Did he even want it to? "I was thinking," she continued, oblivious to his turmoil, "maybe we could go to Antonio's this weekend? We haven't been there in ages." Antonio's was their favorite Italian restaurant, where they'd celebrated countless anniversaries and birthdays over the years. "Sure," Thomas replied, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. "Sounds good." "Great. I'll make a reservation. Oh, and don't forget, we need to call Emily tonight. She's expecting to hear about our Thanksgiving plans." After they hung up, Thomas sat motionless, the phone still in his hand. The casual conversation about future plans felt surreal. How could Kate discuss Thanksgiving when she was planning to meet her lover tomorrow? Tomorrow. The text had said, "The usual room." If he wanted irrefutable proof, if he wanted to catch them in the act, tomorrow was his opportunity. Thomas spent the rest of the day in a fog of pain and planning. When Kate returned home that evening, he performed the role of unsuspecting husband, discussing their daughter's Thanksgiving visit and complaining about work problems that suddenly seemed trivial. All the while, he was watching her, this woman he had loved for more than half his life, searching for signs of the stranger she had become. How had he missed it? The slight flush that came to her cheeks when her phone chimed with a text. The way she angled her body away from him when replying. The new perfume she'd started wearing months ago. That night, when Kate reached for him in bed, Thomas made an excuse about not feeling well. The thought of her touching him, after she had been with another man, made his skin crawl. As he lay awake in the darkness, listening to Kate's breathing once again, Thomas made his decision. Tomorrow, he would follow her. Tomorrow, he would confront the truth in its ugliest form. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. Thomas went to work as usual, unable to focus on anything beyond the confrontation that lay ahead. He left early, telling his assistant he had a doctor's appointment, and positioned his car where he could observe the school parking lot without being noticed. At 3:45, he watched Kate emerge from the building. Instead of heading toward her usual route home, she drove in the opposite direction. Thomas followed at a safe distance, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. 20 minutes later, Kate's car turned into the parking lot of the Lakeside Inn, a mid-range hotel just off the highway. Thomas parked across the street and watched as she grabbed a small overnight bag from her trunk and walked inside. He waited, his heart pounding painfully in his chest. 15 minutes later, another car pulled into the lot, a silver Audi that Thomas recognized from Derek Sullivan's social media photos. The music teacher emerged, looking around furtively before entering the hotel. Thomas sat in his car, feeling as if he might be sick. Despite all the evidence, some part of him had been clinging to the hope that he was wrong, that there was some explanation that wouldn't destroy the life they'd built together. He gave them 20 minutes that felt like an eternity, before he approached the hotel. At the front desk, he hesitated. What name would the room be under? I'm meeting Derek Sullivan, he told the young woman at reception. I believe he's expecting me. She typed something into her computer. Mr. Sullivan is in room 214. Should I call up for you? The elevator ride to the second floor was the longest of his life. Each step down the hallway toward room 214 felt like walking through quicksand. When he finally stood before the door, he paused, his hand raised to knock. Behind this door was the end of his marriage. Behind this door, 32 years of trust and love and shared history were being desecrated. There was a moment of silence, then muffled voices. Footsteps approached the door. The door opened a few inches, the security chain still engaged. Derek Sullivan's face appeared in the gap, confusion turning to shock as he recognized Thomas. I think you have the wrong room, Derek said, attempting to close the door. Thomas pushed against it. I don't think so. Is my wife in there with you? The door closed briefly as Derek unhooked the chain, then opened fully. Derek stood there in a hotel bathrobe, his expression a mixture of defiance and embarrassment. Thomas, he said, as if they were colleagues meeting at a conference. This isn't how... Kate was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching the sheets around her, her face drained of color when she saw him. How did I find out? Thomas finished for her. Does it matter? I know everything, Kate. I've seen the texts. I know this has been going on for months. The room fell silent. Thomas looked around at the evidence of their betrayal. Wine glasses on the nightstand, Kate's clothes draped over a chair, the rumpled bed. No, Thomas said sharply. Stay. You're as much a part of this conversation as she is. Derek looked at Kate, who nodded slightly. He sat down in the room's only armchair, visibly uncomfortable. Thomas turned his attention back to his wife. 32 years, Kate. 32 years, and this is how you repay my trust? With lies and betrayal? Don't. He cut her off. Don't insult me by lying to my face when I've caught you in bed with another man. I want to know why, Thomas continued, his voice breaking slightly. Was I not enough? Did our life together mean so little to you that you could throw it away like this? Things like this don't just happen, Thomas said bitterly. You made choices. Every lie, every secret meeting, every time you came home to me after being with him. Those were all choices. Derek cleared his throat. Mr. Harrington, I know this is difficult, but... Thomas rounded on him. You don't get to speak. You knew she was married. You pursued her anyway. It wasn't like that, Kate interjected. I was the one who... She stopped, seeming to realize her admission would only make things worse. The one who what? Thomas pressed. The one who initiated it? Is that supposed to make me feel better? Kate stood up, still wrapped in the sheet. Tom, please, can we discuss this at home? Just the two of us? Thomas laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. So now you want privacy? Now you're concerned about our home? But you did, Thomas replied quietly. You destroyed everything we built together. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Don't come home tonight, Kate. I can't bear to look at you right now. As he walked out, he heard Kate call his name, her voice breaking with sobs. He didn't turn back. In the hotel hallway, Thomas leaned against the wall, suddenly struggling to breathe. The confrontation had drained him completely. He had imagined this moment, rehearsed what he would say, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of seeing his wife with another man. He made it to his car before the tears came, great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. For the first time since discovering Kate's betrayal, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his grief. Everything he had believed about his life and his marriage had been a lie. And now, at 58, Thomas Harrington faced a future he had never imagined, one without the woman he had loved for most of his adult life. The weeks following the confrontation at the hotel were a blur of pain and practical matters. Thomas changed the locks on their home and hired a lawyer. Kate moved in with her sister temporarily, calling and texting repeatedly, begging for a chance to explain, to talk things through. Thomas ignored most of her messages, responding only to practical questions about bills or their upcoming separation. Their children were devastated by the news. Emily, their 30-year-old daughter, flew home from Seattle immediately. Their son, Michael, 28, called daily from Boston, trying to understand what had happened to the parents whose marriage he had always seen as unshakable. "Dad, are you sure there's no way to work this out?" Emily asked one evening as they sat in the kitchen that felt too large, too empty without Kate's presence. "Mom made a terrible mistake, but people can change. Marriages can heal." Thomas looked at his daughter, so much like Kate in appearance, with the same dark eyes and determined expression, and felt a fresh wave of grief. "Some betrayals cut too deep, Em," he said gently. "Your mother didn't have a one-night stand. She carried on a deliberate affair for months. She lied to my face every day. I can't just forgive that." Emily wiped away tears. "I know, I'm not defending what she did. It's just, you two were always my model for what a good marriage looks like. I can't believe it's ending like this." Neither could Thomas. In his darkest moments, alone in the house filled with memories, he questioned everything. Had there been signs he missed? Had Kate been unhappy for years without his knowledge? Was there something he could have done differently? His friends rallied around him. Jack, his best friend since college, took him fishing and let him talk, or not talk as needed. His brother flew in from Chicago and stayed for a week, helping Thomas sort through the practical aspects of separation. At work, Thomas threw himself into his projects with renewed intensity, staying late most evenings to avoid returning to the empty house. His colleagues noticed the change but respected his privacy, offering support without prying. Kate continued her attempts at reconciliation. She sent a 12-page handwritten letter explaining how the affair had begun during a period when she had felt invisible and unappreciated, how Derek had made her feel desired and important again. She claimed it had been a terrible mistake that she regretted deeply and would spend the rest of her life atoning for if Thomas would just give her another chance. Thomas read the letter twice, then filed it away with the divorce papers his lawyer had prepared. 6 weeks after the confrontation, Thomas agreed to meet Kate at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, to discuss the division of their assets. It was the first time they had seen each other since the hotel. Kate looked thinner, her eyes shadowed by dark circles. She had aged years and weeks. Despite everything, Thomas felt a pang of concern for her. Thomas nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "My lawyer suggested we try to agree on the major points before involving the courts. It will be simpler for everyone." Kate flinched at his businesslike tone. "Is that all this is to you now? A transaction to be completed?" "No, but I hoped," she trailed off, then tried again. "Tom, we've been together for more than half our lives. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counted for everything," he replied quietly. "That's why your betrayal hurt so much." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their broken marriage hanging between them. "Are you still seeing him?" Thomas finally asked, not sure he wanted to know the answer. Kate shook her head. "No, it ended the day you found us. It should have ended long before that." Thomas felt no satisfaction from this news. "Let's focus on why we're here," he said, pulling out a folder of documents. "I've drawn up a proposed division of assets. I think you'll find it fair." As they went through the list, the house, retirement accounts, vehicles, furniture, Thomas was struck by how clinical it felt to dismantle a life built over decades. Each item represented shared memories, now tainted. "What about the lake house?" Kate asked, referring to the small cabin they had purchased 10 years ago as a weekend getaway. "I thought we could sell it and split the proceeds," Thomas replied, "unless you want to buy out my share." Thomas didn't respond. He couldn't allow himself to be pulled into nostalgia. The lake house had been their special place, where they had watched sunsets from the dock, where they had talked about growing old together. Now those memories were just another casualty of Kate's choices. As they finished their discussion and prepared to leave, Kate reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I know you don't believe me, but I never stopped loving you, Tom. What I did, it wasn't about love. It was about my own weakness, my own failings." Outside the coffee shop, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Kate asked, "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" Thomas looked at his wife, soon to be his ex-wife, and saw both the young woman he had fallen in love with and the older woman who had broken his heart. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Right now, I'm just trying to survive this." As he watched Kate walk to her car, shoulders slumped in defeat, Thomas felt the first faint stirring of something beyond pain. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance that this was his new reality. That night, alone in their house, now just his house, Thomas opened a bottle of scotch and allowed himself to truly grieve for the marriage that had defined most of his adult life. He looked through old photo albums, remembering the good years, the love that had been real despite how it ended. By morning, he had made a decision. He would not allow Kate's betrayal to destroy him. He would not spend the rest of his life bitter and angry. Somehow, he would find a way forward. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time since discovering the affair, Thomas felt a glimmer of hope that there might be life after betrayal. Spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal that Thomas hadn't expected to feel. The divorce had been finalized in February, relatively amicable as these things go. Kate hadn't contested any of his terms, seeming to accept the financial settlement as a form of penance. Thomas had kept the house, unable to face the thought of leaving the home where he had raised his children, despite the memories of Kate that lingered in every room. She had moved into a small apartment closer to her school, starting over at 56 with a fraction of the life she had once had. Their social circle had inevitably fractured. Some friends had distanced themselves, uncomfortable with taking sides. Others had rallied around Thomas, offering support and companionship as he navigated his new status as a single man after 3 decades of marriage. To his surprise, Thomas found himself developing new friendships and rekindling old ones that had fallen by the wayside during his married years. Jack had introduced him to a group of men who played poker every other Thursday, mostly divorced or widowed. They understood the unique challenges of starting over later in life. Work remained a constant, but Thomas had begun to think about retirement more seriously. The Peterson contract had been successfully completed, earning him a substantial bonus. His financial advisor assured him that despite the divorce settlement, his retirement plans remained on track. It was on a Saturday in April, nearly 6 months after discovering Kate's affair, that Thomas decided to visit the lake house. He hadn't been there since before the separation, unable to face the memories associated with the place. But as spring bloomed, he felt drawn to the peaceful setting that had once been his favorite retreat. The drive took just over an hour. As he turned onto the familiar gravel road leading to the cabin, Thomas felt a mixture of apprehension and nostalgia. The property looked much as he remembered. The small A-frame cabin nestled among tall pines, the wooden dock extending into the clear lake water. Inside, a fine layer of dust covered the furniture. Thomas opened windows to air out the musty smell, then walked through the rooms, touching objects that held memories. The old record player where they had danced to Sinatra on rainy evenings, the handmade quilt Kate's mother had given them, the collection of board games they had played with the children during summer vacations. To his surprise, the pain he expected to feel was muted, replaced by a gentle melancholy. This place had been a source of joy for many years. Perhaps it could be again, in a different way. Thomas spent the day cleaning and making minor repairs, then sat on the dock as the sun began to set, a glass of bourbon in hand. The tranquility of the lake, the calls of returning birds, the gentle lapping of water against the shore, all combined to create a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in months. There was a pause. "Are you okay? I know that place has a lot of memories." Thomas looked out over the water, golden in the setting sun. "I'm okay, Em. Better than I expected, actually." "That's good," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Listen, the reason I called, Michael and I were talking, and we'd like to have a family dinner next weekend. With both you and Mom." Thomas tensed. He hadn't been in the same room with Kate since finalizing the divorce. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Please, Dad." Emily pleaded. "We understand why you and Mom couldn't stay together. We're not asking you to reconcile, but you're still our parents, and there will be events in our lives where you'll both be present. Weddings, grandchildren someday. We need to find a way to be a family, even if it's different now." Thomas sighed. His children had been caught in the middle of their parents' pain, trying to maintain relationships with both while respecting Thomas's anger and Kate's remorse. After hanging up, Thomas remained on the dock until darkness fell completely, contemplating his daughter's request. The thought of seeing Kate in a social setting, of maintaining a facade of civility, was daunting, but Emily was right. They would always be connected through their children. The next morning, Thomas made another decision. Instead of selling the lake house as originally planned, he would keep it as his own retreat. This place had always restored his spirit. Now he would reclaim it as part of his new life. Ikolana. On the drive back to town, Thomas found himself thinking about the family dinner Emily had proposed. The anger that had sustained him through the worst months had gradually subsided, leaving room for more nuanced emotions. He wasn't ready to forgive Kate, but perhaps he was ready to stop allowing her betrayal to dictate his every decision. The following Saturday, Thomas arrived at Emily's apartment with a bottle of wine and a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Michael opened the door, embracing his father warmly. Thomas nodded, steeling himself as he entered the living room. Kate stood by the window, wearing a simple blue dress he had never seen before. She looked different somehow, her hair styled in a new way, her posture less confident than he remembered. Emily bustled in from the kitchen, her relief palpable as she observed their civil greeting. "Dinner's almost ready. Dad, can you open the wine?" The evening progressed with careful conversation, everyone avoiding sensitive topics. They discussed Michael's promotion, Emily's new boyfriend, mutual friends, and neutral memories that didn't touch on the pain of recent months. As they ate dessert, Kate mentioned that she had enrolled in a painting class, something she had always wanted to do but had never found time for during their marriage. "That's great," Thomas said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "You always had talent." Kate looked startled by the compliment. "Thank you. It's been therapeutic." After dinner, as Thomas prepared to leave, Kate approached him in the hallway. Kate hesitated, then added, "I know I have no right to ask, but are you doing okay, Tom?" The question caught him off guard. In their post-separation interactions, they had carefully avoided personal inquiries. She nodded, her eyes reflecting a sadness that Thomas recognized from his own mirror. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." As Thomas drove home, he realized that the evening had been less difficult than he had anticipated. Seeing Kate had stirred complex emotions, but the overwhelming anger that had consumed him for months had continued to recede. That night, Thomas sat on his back porch, contemplating the stars visible through the trees. The dinner had been a small step, but a significant one. He wasn't ready to be friends with Kate. Might never be, but perhaps they could establish a new kind of relationship based on their shared history and love for their children. More importantly, the evening had confirmed what Thomas had begun to suspect during his visit to the lake house. He was healing. The betrayal would always be part of his story, but it no longer defined him completely. Unya. As spring blossomed into summer, Thomas continued his process of rebuilding. He joined a hiking club, rediscovering his love for the outdoors. He reconnected with old friends and made new ones. He spent weekends at the lake house, sometimes inviting friends, sometimes enjoying the solitude. One Sunday afternoon in July, as Thomas worked on repainting the lake house dock, a woman walked by with a golden retriever. She stopped to let the dog drink from the lake. "I'm Diane," she said. "I bought the Johnson place down the shore last month." They chatted easily about the area, the best fishing spots, the local restaurants. Diane was a retired librarian, widowed 3 years earlier. Her warmth and straightforward manner were immediately appealing. "I'm having a small gathering next weekend," she said, as she prepared to continue her walk. "Just a few neighbors for a barbecue. You're welcome to join us." Thomas hesitated only briefly before accepting. "I'd like that. Can I bring anything?" As he watched her walk away, the dog bounding ahead, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. The simple pleasure of meeting someone new, with no expectations beyond the moment. That evening, as Thomas sat on his newly painted dock watching the sunset, he reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. The pain of Kate's betrayal had not disappeared entirely. Perhaps it never would, but it had transformed into something he could carry without being crushed by its weight. At 58, Thomas Harrington was building a life he had never anticipated. It wasn't the life he had planned, the one he had expected to share with Kate into old age. But as he looked out over the peaceful lake, he recognized that this new path held its own possibilities for joy, connection, and perhaps even love. The future stretched before him, uncertain but no longer frightening. And for the first time since that October evening when he had found the hidden phone, Thomas felt truly ready to embrace whatever came next. The autumn leaves created a kaleidoscope of color around the lake house as Thomas carried a tray of coffee and freshly baked muffins onto the deck. Diane looked up from her book, smiling as he set the tray on the small table between their chairs. Thomas poured coffee into 2 mugs, handing one to Diane. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a small touch that still brought a pleasant warmth to his chest. Their relationship had developed slowly over the past year, beginning with friendship and gradually deepening into something more. Diane understood the scars left by betrayal. She had her own history of loss and renewal after her husband's long illness. Neither of them rushed or pushed, content to let their connection evolve naturally. "Emily called while you were baking," Diane mentioned. "She wanted to confirm we're both coming to dinner next week." Thomas absorbed this information, searching for his reaction. To his surprise, he felt only a mild curiosity, not the sharp pain such news might have triggered months ago. Kate had begun dating again recently, a fact that Emily had shared hesitantly, watching her father's face for signs of distress. Thomas had assured his daughter that her mother deserved happiness too, and had meant it. The family dinners that had begun so awkwardly had become regular events, evolving into a new tradition that acknowledged their changed circumstances while preserving the bonds that remained important. Kate and Thomas had established a cordial relationship, focused primarily on their shared love for their children. "I'm glad she's moving forward," Thomas said, and realized he truly was. The anger that had once consumed him had gradually transformed into something like compassion, not for what Kate had done, but for the flawed humanity they shared. Diane reached over and squeezed his hand. "You're a good man, Thomas Harrington." He smiled at her, this woman who had unexpectedly become such an important part of his life. At 59, Thomas had not been looking for love when Diane walked into his life with her golden retriever and warm smile. But sometimes, he had learned, life offered second chances when you least expected them. Later that afternoon, as they walked along the lakeshore, Thomas reflected on the journey of the past year. The betrayal that had shattered his world had also, paradoxically, opened doors to new possibilities. Without the painful ending of his marriage, he might never have reclaimed the lake house as his own space, might never have met Diane, might never have discovered the strength and resilience he now knew he possessed. The weight of silence, the unspoken truths and hidden deceptions that had undermined his marriage, had nearly broken him. But in confronting that pain, in refusing to be defined by betrayal, Thomas had found his way to a life that felt authentic and increasingly joyful. As the sun began to set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Diane slipped her hand into his. Together, they watched the day end and a new evening begin, comfortable in the shared silence that held no secrets, no lies, only the simple truth of 2 people choosing to walk forward together, one day at a time.